Hello and welcome back to Inquisitor Martyr. Last time we ended up facing off against more Dark Eldar and managed to take a look at one of their pain catalysts. And now we'll get to hop into the Imperial Knight and destroy them.
Remember, Knight, that the existence of these pain catalysts is a sin against the machine god. A mockery of everything the Omnissiah has taught us. The Auger scanners have successfully detected their location. Destroy them all.
A task worthy of my mighty war machine. Onwards!
So, news from the miniature side of 40K. There's some new Horus Heresy stuff coming out. There's, I believe it's the Kratos pattern assault tank. There's a bunch of new box sets and such. And with all that in the announcements, people started talking about whether or not we should start using these miniatures in standard 40K, current setting tabletop.
Inquisitor, it is an honor to fight alongside you again.
Since, as it stands, their stat sheets aren't for normal 40K. They're explicitly for Horus Heresy. So they would need new sets. But it's something people are talking about. And it is definitely something to think about because it's a weird position. Because on one hand, I did a video not too long ago saying, hey, there's a lot of bloat within Space Marines. And there is. I still stand by that. But, at the same time, Horus Heresy is a finite setting. You can only go so far before, that time and that event ends. And I'm sure Games Workshop is going to try to stretch that as long as humanly possible. But, in the end, that stuff is finite. At one point or another, they're going to have to call it quits and say, look, we're done. We're not releasing any more story stuff. The miniatures that are out are what there is, and call it. You can't keep having more and more battles because it is a time frame. It's not like standard 40K where, you can just sit around and be like, oh yeah, you're fighting orcs, you're fighting Tau, fighting Eldar, Dark Eldar, Necrons, Chaos, Tyranids, anything and everything, all must go. There's a finite amount of enemies, you're pretty much just fighting chaos. And the setting doesn't really have room for more stuff. The characters are kind of set in stone doing things. You can't really be like, oh yeah, Horus is here, and he's also here, and he's also here, and he's also here, and he's over there, and Fabius Bile's in 6 places at once. At a certain point, you're gonna really be stretching it thin on where these characters can be and the significance of some of these conflicts. But so, there's the question of, should they be added to standard tabletop? I say yes. Flat out, they should. The easy way to do it, if we're being real, is to sit down and say, okay, look at the lore. The lore says for some of these old tanks that they're essentially put in stasis when they're not in use. They're so advanced that even the oldest masters of the Forge don't typically know how they work entirely and don't like to try to fix them because, they don't know how they function. They're just as prone to fix it as they would break it. And it's this idea of like, oh, well, they only use them for emergencies. Well, considering the Empire is now cleft in twain by a giant warp storm, I think now is an emergency. You know, when half the Empire cannot see the light of the Astronomicon, I think it's time to start pulling out the old, super high-tech gear and start slapping people with it. And in terms of balance, because in theory these pieces are so advanced that current vehicles pale in comparison, honestly, make them like a hero unit. Oh, you have this advanced, Sakaran tank. Well, because it's we'll just label it a relic vehicle, you can only have one on the field. Unless you have, a certain unit or a certain stratagem or something that you can employ that allows you to deploy a second relic vehicle, but it comes at some cost.
Grotesque heaps of flesh, piled up like a terrible offering to alien gods. These Xenos raiders deserve the Emperor's justice. Cowards and torturers, all of them.
And I think that's the best way, because then it also gets a little extra value out of them, because not everybody buys Horus Heresy. They don't. Some people just don't care. And the setting doesn't really include a lot of stuff. You can't play Tau in Horus Heresy. So, a lot of races and people play them don't really get play, so they just don't bother. This way, at least your Space Marine and your Chaos faction players have another reason to buy them. And speaking of Chaos, it makes sense for Chaos to have these vehicles. Within the lore, it even says that a lot of the traitor legions fled with what they could, and because they don't have as reliable of supply lines, they just use whatever they can. A lot of it is heavily corrupted by Chaos at this point and is essentially turned into demon engines or Chaos engines, but they still try to use them. And so you have that, and that could be an easy justification. And it could allow Chaos to field multiple, we're just going to keep calling them relic vehicles, but you have a different stat line. Oh, they're demonically infused, so they're not as effective in one way or another, or they get some stat tweak.
We are the cabal of the jagged maze. We are the masters of the nightmare roads. We are the ones who turn wounds into reality. We take what we want. I will give you one final warning. What you have seen so far is nothing but a glimpse of our mighty armies. Lay down your weapons and come to me begging for mercy. Otherwise, you will perish miserably and watch your precious worlds burn. Leave this some sector to us and never return.
But there's definitely ways that they could be implemented that are a lot more feasible. And yeah, like I said, there's already the issue of these Space Marines having too many units. And that's why I think the relic idea makes them a little more palatable, because then it's one specialist thing, as opposed to somebody just being like, oh, well, my Primaris Marines have a full armory of just high-end ancient tanks that should be far more powerful than standard ones. And you could balance it out by just giving them higher point values, but that still runs into the problem of people just use them still. And use them en masse as opposed to being more of a unique thing. And they could even do that with some of the weapons for infantry, which they should do, because it's, once again, it's stupid that everything is explained away as, oh, well, it's held in case of emergencies. And the other argument of, oh, well, it's stuff they don't understand. it doesn't really hold water anymore. Because when you have Archmagos Belisarius Call going, oh yeah, you know the Space Marines? The Emperor's will given flesh? You know, these creatures that are viewed by the public as essentially divine. Yeah, I just popped them open, fiddled around, and made them better now. If the dude can upgrade Space Marines, he can look at old vehicles and weapons and be like, yeah, we can remake that. It might be a little iffy, but well, we can do that. Just kind of drives me crazy. Because just of how everything's written, it should be...
Inquisitor.
It should make sense that they could have access to all this equipment and be able to upgrade this stuff. Because, like I said, they upgraded... Call upgraded people. I don't know how you do that, but he did.
Inquisitorial clearance codes and binary rosette ready for transmission.
If there is one thing I've learned from my previous encounters, if you suspect any Dark Elder presence, it is better to arrive unannounced.
Request noted. Monitoring of the adjacent segment of the Void in progress. Traffic around the Void station is scarce. Vox channels are silent.
Considering that this orbital is the seat of the government, it's more than suspicious. I'm going straight to the government. I have no time for polite meddlings. Inquisitor, what an that was unexpected.
But yeah, I'd like to see a lot of the old equipment get used. Because there's a lot of cool stuff, a lot of vehicles, and a lot of stuff that made factions unique. For instance, a lot of stuff for Thousand Sons. Thousand Sons had a lot of cool stuff, but they just kinda don't use it anymore. And I'd like to see it come back in some way, shape, or form.
If you destroyed my ship, my vengeance will know no bounds. I swear, even you will learn a thing or two about pain.
Or, for instance, there's... There was some weapons, I can't remember exactly what they were, but in Horus Heresy they were essentially these like radiation cannons that were frowned upon because they were deemed as like unsportsmanlike to use. They were dishonorable. I'm like, dishonorable against who? Traitors? That's fine. What about orcs? Or demons? Or Tau? Give me the cool radiation cannons. Give me all the cool stuff that's Horus Heresy that just kind of gets swept under the rug. Like, yeah, we don't use that anymore. Yeah, we understand it's super powerful and would make these fights easier, but we don't do that. And I'll just keep pointing it out. Call upgraded Space Marines. He can do anything. He got the plot armor now. He's given the power to make anything a reality. I guess the question would be... It's not really related to it, but it's kind of related is... What are we going to see next? You know, we have the Leagues of Votann coming, but are we going to see any progress with the Emperor? I know we've been kind of sitting on that one for ages, but the way the story's kind of progressed, I feel like we kind of need something to happen with the Emperor. Otherwise, I feel like this is all kind of for nothing. And it would be nice, because then he could pop up and be like, hey, I invented new stuff. Go crazy. But I saw people also talking about Horus Heresy just ending it, and from a storytelling perspective, doing a what if series, kind of like what Marvel did. And have... The one I saw was, what if the Eldar Empire never fell, and they never created Slaanesh? You know, you have the Empire of Man just starting to reach out into the stars and really solidify their empire, and you have this massive Eldar Empire still standing. How that's gonna play out. You know, how is Chaos gonna work? Because Slaanesh won't exist. And I was like, that would be cool. I think they already kind of did one that was, what if Horus won and the rebellion, the Horus Heresy, succeeded? There's a few other ones that are possible. I'm just trying to think what would be a good one. A big problem is a lot of them are just kind of like, what if we wrote this faction out? Like, what if Trazen the Infinite never woke up? What if the Horus Heresy happened, but it wasn't Erebus who ended up causing Horus to defect and fall to Chaos? What if it was entirely Horus not even being a pawn to Chaos, just being like, hey, you know, I feel neglected, I want attention, therefore I'm doing this? I've seen people do settings, I think it was on 1D4chan, that I think that was where they did the setting that was essentially the inverse or partial inverse of the Horus Heresy. So what happens if the Ultramarines were the ones who defected? A couple other chapters switch sides, some of them stay the same. And it's an interesting one, you know. How do things like that really play into an overarching story? I think it'd be cool. You know, do a one-off, do a handful of stories related to it. Little what-if scenarios. I think they're good just to kind of keep people happy and kind of with new things to think about and look at. Because in the end, if Horus Heresy ends, on one hand, cool, we can get more focus on main story, but I don't know what's gonna go where. And considering with the tabletop they do a number of like narrative things, and some of it actually plays into the overarching story. You know, you can only do so many of those in a set amount of time. I don't know, I think there's stuff to be done. I just really want to see some cool tanks and stuff get brought back. Like, there's a Rhino variant that has 2 top-mounted bolters that you can swap out for, like, rocket pods that make whirlwinds look pretty dinky. I was like, that's cool. You know, that's a neat design. I feel like there's a lot of opportunities, though, for cool vehicle alterations. Like, I know you can get Fragstorm cannons on certain Land Raiders, I believe it is. And they essentially do like a cone in front. And it'd be cool to have like a dirty canister shell that's radiation that just blasts a cone of radioactive gunk and metal shrapnel into whoever's in front. I feel like that'd be great against Tyranids, until they eventually just evolve to negate it like they do everything. But until then, it'd be cool. And I'd really just like to see Chaos get some more stuff. Chaos really doesn't get... They don't get good stuff. And that's what kind of sucks. Especially, like I've said before, we don't have as many Chaos variants or Chaos God variants of generic Chaos stuff. Like how the Plague Reaper is the Nurgle equivalent of a Baneblade. We don't get more stuff along those lines, or even just a gun you can swap out.
The governor has been dead for a while.
And that is all for now. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit the like button. It helps out the channel a lot. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.